So periodically, one of the things that I really like to do here on the channel is to take games that you've suggested either directly or just mentioned in passing in the comments and finally give them a shot for myself and then sort of report back on what my experience was like. And that's exactly what I'm going to do today, where I'm going to go through 5 more games that you have suggested in the comments here on the channel that I have checked out for the first time. And I have to say, this has gone exceptionally well, and this might be one of my favorite ones yet, because pretty much every game that I played, I had a great time with. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but let's go ahead and hop in with the first one, which is Traveler's Rest, courtesy of Wilminator. So the basic premise for Traveler's Rest is that you are a tavern keeper, and the gameplay will feel pretty much immediately familiar if you ever played any sort of a simulator game in the vein of something like Stardew Valley, or Farm Together, or Forager, and the core gameplay loop obviously revolves around keeping all of the customers that wander into your tavern completely happy as you keep them well fed and looked after. Now I will say the controls in this game took me a little bit to get used to, because you can kind of flip between just regular mode where you're kind of walking around and you can interact with the environment, versus build mode where you can sort of reposition the different elements within your tavern to make it more aesthetically appealing or better suited to your patrons. And these activities really fall into 2 broad categories: tavern keeping and, well, everything else. Tavern keeping involves serving, cleaning, stocking, serving customers food and spirits, refilling drinks, and finally getting everyone out at a reasonable hour so you can get some sleep without passing out, because much like Stardew Valley, that is a mechanic here, and if you stay up past, I believe it's 3 a.m., you will just immediately pass out. And when it comes to all of the in-game activities that are not tavern keeping, it really feels more like standard crafty survival fare, where you'll be scavenging, building new supplies for your tavern, mining, learning new recipes, and stocking up before nightfall so that you can get back to, well, tavern keeping. One of the things that was surprising me about this one is it does not run at 60 frames per second. It seemed to hover around 30 frames per second, but also this is an early access game, so maybe that's something that they'll work out on a long enough timeline. It's not bad or unplayable by any stretch, it's just kind of surprising. Also, I did notice a few bugs in the game when I was playing it so far, but again, early access, so it makes perfect sense, right? And I'm sure these things are things that can be rectified. But in particular, I didn't really like how the menu text was covering up other elements that I could see. Also, the quest and tutorial text up here in the upper right was just really huge, and it sort of caused a gameplay hindrance for both tavern keeping operations, because I really couldn't see if somebody wanted to refill, and then also interacting with NPCs, since it would occasionally obscure their text, which that seems like something they should definitely fix, because you don't want somebody to, miss out on story dialogue because you've got this, giant text box that's covering it up. Also, while everything worked perfectly fine for navigating the menu and text and everything, I don't think it would be the worst idea to make interacting with these elements a little bit juicier. And what I mean by that is, whenever I was repositioning furniture, I kind of felt like it should have like a sound effect or something, just made it feel more weighty and responsive and really felt like impactful. But honestly, that's just nitpicking and just something that I would recommend for anybody who's making this style of game, I guess. But those minor gripes aside, I love the visual style that's on display here, and it's perfectly in line with other genre staples. And naturally, it feels really warm and cozy, particularly at night when you have to stoke a fire to make sure the tavern doesn't get too cold. And I'm sure because it's a warm and cozy game, that's exactly why Will recommended it on that Cozy Games video that I did last week. All in all, it's definitely a game that I'll be coming back to, probably while I watch something with tavern-heavy aesthetics on in the background, like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or something like that. So yeah, again, Will, thank you so much for the suggestion. I had a lot of fun messing around with this one. And this next entry comes courtesy of Kill Repeat 8491, who I believe is the only person who has been featured twice on these videos so far, and that's only because I feel so bad, because you have recommended this game for, I think, the better part of a year at this point. I kept saying I was going to get to it. Well, I finally have, and that game is Phoenotopia Awakening, and it is a real treat. The setup for Phoenotopia is that a great war has transpired and the Council of Humanity opts to hide away in underground metal bunkers, and after a long while the Earth heals and humanity reemerges to start rebuilding. It has a short, to-the-point setup, and it really ramps up nicely thanks to some really sharp writing to boot that remains curt but without feeling bland or uninteresting. And the gameplay itself feels a whole lot like Zelda 2 and a little bit of Metroid, and it's just kind of like this medium-weight RPG. Like, I wouldn't call a game with cooking and crafting recipes inherently lightweight, but man, it feels good, and the structure and pacing of the early game is really satisfying. I take this portion here where I'm speaking with some other kids left to right, and one of them tells me that I should shoot the lizards that I see in the environment. To this point, I hadn't had anything to shoot with, and then it immediately answers this by providing me an opportunity to try this kid's slingshot. And I really love this sort of considered tutorializing that is playful without overloading you with like jarring text boxes or anything like that. Also, just to talk a little bit more about how much I love this sequence, I love that after I used the slingshot here, it not only opened a very Mario Bros. 2 looking door, but the actual mechanic of aiming the slingshot feels like a direct nod to Yoshi's Island, where you used to kind of aim in the same manner to throw Yoshi's eggs. I just really like that. And honestly, the deeper you get into Phoenotopia, the more it really just feels like a love letter to 90s gaming, or just a mixtape of some of the greatest games from that era. And to that end, I would say every game that I saw demonstrated to be in Phoenotopia's gameplay loop would be Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, and Adventure of Link. Even Milon's Secret Castle if you're looking for a deeper cut, but that was also a really challenging game. And the presentation here is just completely gorgeous. Like, lots of retro-style games look good just by virtue of conjuring up that feeling of nostalgia for like that, 3rd and 4th gen era. But here it's both appealing as a texture, but functionally every movement, action, and selection you make is just kind of punctuated by these really juicy sound effects and animations. Like, I love how the speech bubble here just kind of gently wobbles back and forth. And beyond the aesthetics and gameplay falling into harmony, the soundtrack is just this awesome blend of traditional melodic piano riffs, and then also these really great chiptune jams that just seem to pop in out of nowhere. But yeah, long story short, Phoenotopia Awakening is just a tremendously good time if you're a fan of any retro adventure games in that vein from the 8 and 16-bit era. And kill repeat, again, sorry it took so long for me to really play this and sink my teeth into it, but you are 100% correct, it is a super fun game and I definitely recommend it. And speaking of super colorful games, this next one comes from Branko Jakobovich, which I'm so sorry if I butchered that, but this would be a roguelike game, and that would be called Oblivion Override. So in Oblivion Override, you'll be playing as a combat bot in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Your goal is to unravel the web of secrets within this sprawling AI-led dystopia, and lead repeated, painful attempts into Dolce Vase. The premise sounds a little bit ho-hum, like a cyberpunk word salad, but believe me when I say once you get into it, everything from the style to some best-in-class gameplay really bolsters it, and I know that sounds kinda dopey on the surface, but it gets a lot more intriguing as you venture forth through each loop, meeting new characters and unlocking new mechs to play with. Now right out of the gate you'll start with a fairly nimble mech, but it doesn't take long before you meet another one who's willing to give you his chips, so you have some flexibility in how you want to approach the play. Abilities are straightforward to use, and movement feels fast, fluid, and responsive, and you'll need it because whether you're toughing it out through waves of mid-tier scrubs in a combat room, or taking on a boss, Oblivion Override doesn't really pull any punches. And I mean, honestly, of course it shouldn't, because roguelikes are known for their tough but fair brutality, and from what I've seen so far, it stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the most polished ones that I've played. I will say that some of the systems of upgrade and augmentation are a little bit cryptic, and it'd probably be helpful to look up some guides since roguelikes can have a pretty steep learning curve to begin with, especially compared to traditional action-adventure games. But it's hardly the most complicated roguelike I've ever played. I wouldn't necessarily call it breezy, but it's approachable enough to start punching robots and unlocking a ton of interesting abilities to play around with. And all of this is set against a hazy, neon-soaked cyberpunk backdrop that gets one of the fundamental tenets of the genre right, and that is to make winning and losing fun. And sure enough, each time I passed through the loop, I was excited not just to see what the next run or combination of abilities might hold for me, but also what new characters would pop up at home base, and how the story might change or be enriched by some lore bit from one of its principal players. Also, the more I think about it, the more I'm surprised that more roguelikes don't feature a sci-fi setting. I mean, after all, it's a genre that focuses on upgrades, improvements, and augmentations for your character that has to respawn, or in essence, be rebuilt over and over again. And to me, that sure sounds like a peanut butter chocolate situation that would be best paired up with sci-fi, but I digress. When it comes to performance, it runs at a flat 60 FPS. I did see it drop a little bit, but really only during load screens, but yeah, for the most part, this is a buttery smooth game to play that runs at a buttery smooth frame rate. And I would imagine whether you're a genre veteran or a complete newcomer to games like this, that you're probably going to have a pretty good time with Oblivion Override. All in all, I've really enjoyed it so far, and while I'll probably head back to Dead Cells first to get more of that kind of Castlevania action from that recent expansion, this would definitely be the next one on my list to tackle if I was ready to move on to another roguelike. It has a demo, and if you're into roguelike Metroidvanias, you're probably going to love this. Even if you're more so into roguelikes in the vein of Binding of Isaac or Hades, you'll probably enjoy it, particularly on a visual level. So Branko, thanks again for the suggestion, as this has definitely been one of the most enjoyable roguelikes that I've personally played. Alright, next up we've got a throwback to the PS2 era that was remastered, and I believe this actually got a physical release on the Nintendo Switch a few years back. I had never played this game before, but it comes recommended courtesy of the Dumpling Man, and that would be Sphinx and the Cursed Mummy. Now this is a game that obviously is going to follow Sphinx and, well, a cursed mummy in Egypt, where you'll be up against encroaching dark forces. I'm still pretty early in the story to the point of really only getting a lot of experience with Sphinx and not so much the mummy so far, and it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but like a forgivably mixed bag. After all, this is a THQ game that came out originally on the PS2 way back in 2003, so we're talking about like 2 decades of Zelda-like action-adventure improvements that have happened since then within the genre. And it definitely shows its age in the movement, jumping, and combat. Like, it's not atrocious or anything, but it definitely feels clunky by today's standards. And to that end, it's definitely a relic of a time gone by, and I say that not as an insult. For some players out there, they grew up playing this and it's one of their favorite games, and I can see why. It's colorful, inventive, and reasonably appealing to keep pushing through the story so far. And again, it certainly has some rough edges by modern standards, where you're not going to have like autosaves happening. You'll have to remember to deliberately save whenever you get the opportunity. And also the jumping and platforming can feel really finicky at times, but I think it's offset a bit by this huge margin of error that you have for ledge grabs, which sort of takes the edge off, no pun intended. But it's a charming adventure for sure, and I can see why it has sort of a cult following where a lot of people enjoy this style of game. It kind of reminds me of the first time that I played Soul Reaver somehow, and that's probably because of the equal emphasis on combat and puzzle solving and just feeling like a unique premise for a 3D action platformer. Also, the colors in this environment are completely gorgeous, and I am an absolute sucker for vivid, colorful settings that pop on screen, and this absolutely does. So much so that it's one of the few games that I fired up on the Steam Deck recently that made me immediately wish that I had the OLED model at my disposal. And clearly as a much older title, it's not really pushing the boundaries of what the Steam Deck can do or anything, so you're definitely going to get a rock solid 60 out of this one. But if you are looking to revisit a childhood classic, or just want to check out a retro 3D Zelda-like, I think it's worth a look, particularly if you can find it on sale like I did for $3 or $4 versus its normal 15, but hey, even then I don't think that's a terrible price for what is ostensibly a 10 to 20 hour adventure. So Dumpling, I won't say it's my favorite 3D action adventure game of all time, but it definitely has its charms and I have enjoyed my time with it so far. And finally, the last game featured here is from Amanda Parks, and it's a game that had been in my library for some time and I had not gotten around to checking it out, and that would be Kaze and the Wild Masks. Now the setup is you apparently play as some rabbit thing and your friend gets sucked into an evil amulet or something, I think. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have a great grasp of the story here, but I will tell you it quickly took its backseat to some of the best platforming that I've enjoyed so far. And what's crazy is I could have sworn that this game was a Metroidvania for some reason, but it's definitely not a Metroidvania. It is in fact a platform action game, and one that is an incredible throwback specifically to Donkey Kong Country. Again, Donkey Kong is definitely the biggest influence here, but you can also feel Sonic and Mario in this game as well. When it comes to Sonic in particular, I do love that they have hidden bonus stages littered all over the areas that you traverse, and each one of these provides a little test of your platforming skill, but crucially, if you lose, you don't have to replay the entire level to get back into the bonus stage. It will just let you immediately retry it as much as you want, and I love that. I love that it's kind enough to the player to say, hey, you don't have to start all the way from the beginning to do this again, just jump right back in and see if you can get it. And one of the things that jumped out to me immediately about Kaze and the Wild Masks is just how well it captures the basic tenets of what makes a great platforming game. Like every piece of movement, whether that's dashing through the environment, jumping on these little platforms that feel like the tires that you would jump in Donkey Kong Country, using your rabbit's ears to sort of traverse vines that are sort of placed throughout the level. All of it feels top-notch, and there's also a lot of replay incentive as well, because there are lots of collectibles littered throughout each level, including collecting 4 golden letters that spell out Kaze, which, you know, obviously is like spelling out Kong in Donkey Kong Country. And they even got the retro difficulty right with the challenge. Like, it's tough, but not mean-spirited about it. And that's refreshing to see a game with so much retro flair that definitely has teeth, but it won't punish you so much that you start dreading another run at a level. And this also has some of the best pixel art that I've seen. And it's not just that, like, statically speaking, the images look great, but also the animations really pop as well. So yeah, the whole thing is just incredibly inviting. I've had a blast. I definitely want to go through and finish this game just because I was a huge fan of Donkey Kong Country. And in terms of creating a platformer that pays loving homage to Donkey Kong Country, I don't know that I've seen another game do it better than what I've seen in Kaze and the Wild Masks so far. So yeah, performance, rock solid on the Steam Deck. Again, 60 FPS here, probably not surprising as a 2D game that, again, it's not going to tax the hardware in any significant way, but yeah, this was probably my favorite game out of all of them that I've played on this list, so Amanda, thank you again so much for the recommendation. So glad that I didn't let this one rot away in my library, because it is just crazy good fun as somebody who grew up in that 8 and 16-bit era. Alright, and that's it for this one. Again, huge thanks to everybody who either directly or indirectly suggests the games that I should check out. If you have any other suggestions of games you think I should be playing, please do let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for your time, have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one.